My name is Jessica Reynolds, 32 years old, and I grew up believing that your bank account determines your worth. In my family, success was measured in dollars and compassion came with conditions. For years, I accepted their judgment of my choices until that day at our annual family meeting. The mockery in my father's voice when he said, "You're poor," still echoes in my mind, but not as loudly as the silence that followed when my helicopter landed on their perfect lawn. Let me know where you're watching from, hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll tell you how I went from being the family disappointment to making my father's face freeze in shock. Growing up in the Reynolds family meant constant reminders that money equals respect. My father, Richard Reynolds, built a real estate empire from nothing, and he never let anyone forget it. Our childhood home in Connecticut started modest, but expanded with his success, eventually becoming the mansion where the family still gathers today. What began as a small development company grew into Reynolds Enterprises, with properties across 3 states and a family name that opened doors. My father ruled our family like his business, with an iron fist and cold calculation. Every dinner conversation revolved around profits, acquisitions, and status. My older brother Thomas followed perfectly in Dad's footsteps, joining the company after getting his MBA and quickly becoming the golden child. My sister Amanda married the son of another wealthy family, securing a merger of sorts that delighted our father. Then there was me, Jessica the youngest, who looked at the sky instead of property values. From childhood, I was fascinated by flight, by engineering, by creating things rather than acquiring them. I built model airplanes while my siblings built investment portfolios. My mother, Catherine, would smile at my projects, but whisper that I should focus on more practical matters. She loved us in her way, but never challenged my father's values or defended different definitions of success. High school was when the division became unavoidable. While Thomas and Amanda received luxury cars for their 16th birthdays, I asked for flying lessons. My father laughed, thinking it was a phase. When he realized I was serious, the disappointment was palpable. Aviation is a hobby. Jessica, not a career path for a Reynolds, he declared at dinner one night. Unless you plan to buy an airline, which you can't do without real business sense. Despite their disapproval, I worked weekends at the local airport, saving every dollar for those precious hours in the sky. I applied to engineering programs instead of business schools. The day my acceptance letter arrived from MIT, my father barely glanced at it. "Engineering is for people who work for people like us," he said, sliding the letter back across the table. The final break came when I refused to join Reynolds Enterprises after graduation. Instead, I moved to California with nothing but 2 suitcases and determination. My father's parting words were clear. "When you fail, not if when, don't expect me to bail you out." For years after that, our communication consisted of brief phone calls on holidays and the occasional text from my mother. The annual family gathering became an exercise in endurance, hours of subtle and not-so-subtle jabs about my little job and questions about when I would get serious about my future. 3 years ago, I stopped attending altogether, so when the invitation arrived for this year's gathering, I almost threw it away. But something had changed. Something my family didn't know about yet. After staring at the embossed card with the Reynolds family crest for several minutes, I picked up my phone and RSVP'd with a simple, "Yes, I'll be there." The path that led me away from my family's expectations began in a tiny apartment in Oakland where I lived with 3 roommates to make rent while working at an aeronautics research firm. By day, I was the junior engineer taking notes in meetings. By night, I sketched designs for what I believed could revolutionize personal aircraft, specifically helicopters. Traditional helicopters had limitations that plagued the industry for decades: inefficient fuel consumption, noise pollution, safety concerns, and prohibitive maintenance costs. My vision was to create a hybrid electric helicopter with modular components that could be easily maintained, reducing downtime and operating costs by 60%. The design incorporated noise-canceling technology and safety systems that would make personal helicopter ownership practical for more than just the ultra-wealthy. My break came 2 years into this double life at an industry conference where I'd saved for months to attend. Most participants wandered past my modest poster presentation without a second glance. But one person stopped. Eleanor Wright, former Air Force pilot, turned venture capitalist who specialized in aviation innovations. "Explain this rotor configuration to me again," she said after listening to my nervous pitch. An hour later, we were still talking and she handed me her card. "This is either brilliantly innovative or completely impossible. I'm interested in finding out which." Eleanor became the first person to invest in what would become Ascension Aeronautics. Her initial funding allowed me to quit my day job and focus on building the prototype. We worked out of a converted warehouse in Oakland with a small team of engineers who believed in the vision enough to take a chance on reduced salaries and equity. The first 2 years were brutal. Our initial prototype failed spectacularly during testing. 3 potential investors walked away. My apartment flooded, destroying years of hand-drawn designs. I worked 18-hour days, slept on a cot in the workshop, and lived on ramen noodles and coffee. During one particularly dark week, I almost called my father to admit defeat. Instead, I called Eleanor, who arrived at the workshop with pizza and a new perspective. "Stop trying to solve every problem at once," she advised. "Focus on the modular maintenance system first. That alone is revolutionary." That advice changed everything. We rebuilt focusing on one innovation at a time. The modular system worked, cutting maintenance time by 70%. This success attracted our second round of funding. 6 months later, the noise reduction technology tested successfully, and another investor came on board. 5 years after that conference meeting with Eleanor Ascension, Aeronautics had 47 employees, a production facility, and our first commercial model, the Phoenix A1. Aviation magazines called it the Tesla of helicopters. Orders came in faster than we could fill them. Then Meridian Aerospace, one of the largest aviation companies in the world, approached us with an acquisition offer that valued the company at $800 million. The night after signing the preliminary agreement, I sat alone in my office, staring at numbers that seemed unreal. On paper, I was now worth over $300 million. My phone buzzed with a reminder about the upcoming family gathering. For the first time in years, I felt a strange anticipation rather than dread. Not because I wanted to flaunt my success, but because I finally understood that their validation had never been necessary. Still, human nature is complicated. Part of me, the little girl who just wanted her father's approval, wondered if this would finally be enough. I decided to attend, but not to announce my success immediately. I wanted to see my family for who they truly were one last time before everything changed. I deliberately chose a modest rental car for the drive to my parents' estate in Connecticut. The familiar gates opened automatically as I approached, programmed to recognize family vehicles. I wondered briefly if they would have opened for me if I'd arrived in something that better reflected my new status. The circular driveway was already filled with luxury vehicles: my brother's Bentley, my sister's Range Rover, and various cars belonging to aunts, uncles, and cousins. I parked my Toyota next to my cousin Stephanie's Tesla and took a deep breath before grabbing my overnight bag from the trunk. The front door opened before I reached it, revealing my mother in a designer dress and perfectly coiffed hair. "Jessica, darling," she said, air-kissing near my cheek to avoid disturbing her makeup. "We weren't sure you'd actually come this year." "I thought it was time," I replied, noticing her quick assessment of my simple jeans and blazer. Though my wardrobe now included designer pieces, I'd chosen to dress down deliberately. "Well, everyone's in the great room. Your father just opened a 30-year-old Scotch." She lowered her voice. "Try to be pleasant this time, dear. You know how these gatherings are important for family unity." Family unity. An interesting concept in a household where unity meant conformity to my father's vision. The great room was exactly as I remembered. Cathedral ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens, and furniture that looked too expensive to actually sit on. Various family members stood in clusters, champagne flutes in hand. Thomas spotted me first. My brother had gained weight since I'd seen him last, his expensive suit straining slightly at the buttons. "The prodigal daughter returns," he announced, drawing attention to my arrival. "How's life in Where are you now? Seattle, Portland. San Francisco, I corrected, accepting the champagne flute a server offered. Right. Still with that engineering startup thing. He didn't wait for my answer before turning to our cousin. Jessica here thinks she's going to revolutionize aviation with some electric helicopter idea. 5 years and counting, right, sis? I smiled tightly. Something like that. Amanda swept over her diamonds, catching the light. Jessica, your hair looks healthy. You know my stylist could do wonders with your color if you're staying the weekend. My treat. Her eyes flickered to my simple gold earrings, likely assessing their value. Before I could respond, a hush fell over the room as my father entered. Richard Reynolds, at 65, remained imposing, tall, fit, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that missed nothing. He surveyed his domain before noticing me. Jessica, he acknowledged with a slight nod. Surprising to see you here. I trust California is treating you well. It is, Dad. Business is good. He raised an eyebrow. Is it now? Well, we'll hear all about everyone's accomplishments tomorrow at the family meeting. Tradition, after all. The Reynolds family meeting, an annual tradition where each family member presented their contributions to the family legacy. In practice, it was a competition for my father's approval, measured in profit margins and asset acquisitions. Dinner was exactly as I expected. Thomas dominating conversation with talk of a new development project, Amanda discussing her husband's hedge fund, and various cousins trying to impress my father with their own business ventures. I remained mostly quiet, picking at the expertly prepared 5-course meal, while deflecting occasional questions about my little helicopter project. As coffee was served, my father stood and addressed the table. Tomorrow's meeting will begin promptly at 10. I expect everyone to be prepared to discuss their contributions to the Reynolds name this year. Some announcements will be made regarding succession planning for Reynolds Enterprises. He glanced at Thomas, who straightened proudly in his chair. I caught my mother watching me with an unreadable expression. For a moment I thought I saw something like regret in her eyes, but it vanished quickly behind her practiced smile. In my guest room later that night, I checked in with my team about final preparations. Everything was set for tomorrow. As I stared at the ceiling of my childhood home, I wondered if this visit would provide the closure I hoped for or just reopen old wounds. My father's study had always been the inner sanctum of Reynolds Power, a place where deals were made and futures decided. The family meeting took place here every year around a massive mahogany conference table that had once belonged to a banking magnate from the 1920s. Oil paintings of stern-looking Reynolds ancestors lined the walls, along with framed magazine covers featuring my father. At precisely 10 o'clock, we gathered in our assigned seats. My father sat at the head of the table, a leather portfolio in front of him, while my mother took her place at his right. Thomas sat at his left, the position of the heir apparent. I found my name card near the opposite end between a second cousin and an elderly aunt. The purpose of this meeting, my father began, is to assess the strength of the Reynolds family and its contributions to our legacy. We'll begin with business updates. He nodded to Thomas. Son, you have the floor. Thomas stood and activated a sleek presentation on the room's projection system. For the next 20 minutes, he detailed property acquisitions, profit margins, and expansion plans. The numbers were impressive. Reynolds Enterprises had grown 15% over the previous year. My father nodded approvingly as Thomas concluded with projections for the coming year. Amanda went next, discussing her work on the family's charitable foundation, which conveniently provided excellent tax benefits while supporting causes that aligned with Reynolds' business interests. She also proudly announced that her husband's fund had managed a portion of the family portfolio to a 20% return. Cousins, uncles, and aunts followed with their updates. Some managed branches of the family business, others had their own ventures, but all framed their work as contributions to the Reynolds legacy. With each presentation, I felt increasingly disconnected from this version of family, one where worth was calculated rather than felt. Finally, my father turned his gaze to me. Jessica, he said, his tone already dismissive, I understand you're still pursuing your alternative career path. Would you like to share with the family what you've been doing with your engineering degree? Briefly, of course. Polite laughter rippled around the table. I stood suddenly aware that I'd prepared no slides, no charts, no concrete numbers to present. I hadn't planned to reveal everything yet. As some of you know, I've been working in aviation technology for the past few years, I began. My company Ascension Aeronautics has been developing more efficient, safer helicopter designs with reduced operating costs. Helicopters, my uncle interrupted. Isn't that a bit niche? What's your market size there? The personal aircraft market is actually... Jessica has always had unusual interests, my father interjected with a tight smile. While the rest of us built businesses, she built model airplanes. More laughter, less polite this time. I tried again. We've actually made significant progress with our prototype. Progress doesn't pay bills, Jessica. Thomas cut in. What's your revenue? Your profit margin? Any actual sales? Or is this still theoretical? We have orders and... Let me guess, my father interrupted, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. You're still seeking investors, still promising future returns, still running on fumes and optimism. I felt my cheeks burning but maintained my composure. Actually, Jessica, my father said, his voice dropping to that dangerously quiet tone I remembered from childhood. Let's be honest here. This is a family that builds empires, not toys. You've spent years playing engineer while your brother has doubled our property holdings. Your sister's foundation efforts have saved us millions in tax liability while building our public reputation. He gestured around the table. Everyone here understands what it means to contribute to this family. Everyone except you. His eyes narrowed. The truth is, you're poor. Not just financially, though that's certainly true. You're poor in vision, poor in ambition, poor in understanding what the Reynolds name means. The room fell silent as his words hung in the air. All these years, he continued, we've waited for you to come to your senses, to admit that your little rebellion has run its course. Yet here you are, still clinging to some fantasy about reinventing aviation. It's time to grow up. My brother snickered. Maybe we can find her an entry-level position in the marketing department, Amanda joined in. Or she could help with the foundation galas. Even Jessica could handle seating charts. As laughter erupted around the table, something inside me shifted. Not anger exactly, clarity. I excused myself quietly, pulling my phone from my pocket as I stepped into the hallway. After a brief conversation, I returned to the study, where the mockery had already moved on to other topics. I took my seat silently, a small smile playing at my lips as I waited. Since Jessica clearly has nothing substantial to add, my father said, turning to his portfolio, let's move on to the succession planning announcement. I raised my hand slightly. Actually, Dad, I wasn't finished. The annoyance on his face was evident. Jessica, we've already established that your hobby project isn't relevant to this meeting. I think you might want to hear this, I said calmly. Fine, 2 minutes, then we're moving on. I nodded and stood again, a new confidence in my posture. As I was saying, Ascension Aeronautics has been developing next-generation helicopter technology. What I didn't get to mention is that we've completed our commercial prototype, secured patents on 17 innovations, and filled our production capacity for the next 3 years with pre-orders. My father's expression shifted slightly, still dismissive but with a hint of curiosity. In fact, I continued, our Phoenix A1 model was featured in Aviation Weekly as the most significant advancement in personal aircraft design in 20 years. That's partly why I came this weekend. I wanted to share some news with my family in person. A faint sound became noticeable, a rhythmic whump whump growing steadily louder. Thomas frowned. What's that noise? I glanced at my watch. That would be my ride. My father's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? If everyone would like to look out the window, I said, gesturing toward the wall of windows overlooking the rear lawn. You might find this interesting. As if choreographed chairs scraped back as curiosity drew everyone to the windows. The sound grew louder, and then the sleek form of the Phoenix A1 helicopter appeared over the tree line, its distinctive blue and silver body gleaming in the morning sun. The aircraft hovered briefly before descending to the center of my parents' immaculate lawn, touching down with barely a disturbance to the grass. "What the hell is this?" my father demanded, his face flushing. "That," I said quietly, "is the Phoenix A1, the flagship product of Ascension Aeronautics, my company." My brother pressed his face closer to the glass. "That has your company logo on it." "Yes, it does." "You can't just land a helicopter on our lawn," my father sputtered. "Actually, I can. I called ahead to my pilot. He had a small weather delay." The entire family stared in shock as a uniformed pilot emerged from the aircraft. He stood at attention beside it, waiting. As I was trying to explain, I continued in the stunned silence. "I came this weekend because Meridian Aerospace has just finalized their acquisition of Ascension Aeronautics. I wanted to share that news with my family in person." My father's expression froze somewhere between shock and disbelief. My mother's hand flew to her pearl necklace. Thomas's mouth literally hung open. "Acquisition," my father finally managed. "Yes, for $800 million. I let the number sink in. "Would anyone like to come outside and see it up close? My pilot Jackson can explain some of the features. It really is quite revolutionary." The procession to the lawn felt surreal. My entire family, who moments before had been mockingly dismissive, now followed me in stunned silence. The contrast between their designer outfits and their shell-shocked expressions might have been comical under different circumstances. "Jessica," my mother whispered as we walked, "why didn't you tell us?" "I've been telling you for years, Mom. No one wanted to listen." As we approached the helicopter, I introduced Jackson, who had been with Ascension since our second year. "This is the family I've told you about," I said, watching his eyes register understanding. "An honor to meet you all," he said professionally, though I caught the slight protective edge in his voice. "Would you like a tour of the Phoenix's features?" For the next 15 minutes, Jackson explained the revolutionary aspects of the design, the modular maintenance system that reduced downtime by 70%, the noise-canceling technology that made our helicopter 60% quieter than traditional models, the hybrid electric engine that extended range while reducing emissions. "The Phoenix A1 sells for $4.2 million, Jackson concluded, with a current wait list of 16 months. Mrs. Reynolds here is the mastermind behind every innovation that makes it special." "Ms. Reynolds," I corrected gently, and it was a team effort. My father, who had been uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke. $800 million. He repeated, his business mind clearly calculating my personal stake. "And Meridian kept you on as Chief Innovation Officer," I supplied, "with a 5-year contract and full creative control over my division." Thomas stepped forward, suddenly all smiles. "This is incredible, Jess. I always knew you were smart, but this is next level. We should talk about investment opportunities. I have some ideas for how Reynolds Enterprises could partner with your division at Meridian." I regarded my brother calmly. "Thomas, for the past decade, you've made it clear that my work wasn't worth your attention. Every time I tried to share my progress, you changed the subject to your latest property acquisition." "Water under the bridge," he said with a dismissive wave. "Family is family. We support each other." "Do we—" I turned to face my father directly. "10 minutes ago, you called me poor in vision and ambition. You've spent years making it clear that I was a disappointment because I chose a different path. You've never once visited my company or asked genuinely about my work." "Jessica," my father said, his tone shifting to the one he used for difficult business negotiations, "clearly I misjudged the commercial viability of your project. That's a mistake I'm big enough to acknowledge." "It's not about the money," I said quietly. "It never was. That's what you never understood. I built this company because I loved the work, because I believed in creating something meaningful. The financial success is a byproduct, not the purpose." My mother stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Jessica, please. We're all so proud of you now." "Now," I repeated. "That's the problem, isn't it? You're proud now that there's a dollar figure you can understand. But where was that pride when I graduated top of my class at MIT? or when I got my first patent, or when I worked 80-hour weeks to build something I believed in. The past is the past, my father said stiffly. The question is where we go from here. With your new position, there could be synergies between Meridian and Reynolds Enterprises. We should discuss potential collaborations over dinner. I looked at the man who had shaped so much of my life with his approval and disapproval, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. Not a giant, not an oracle of business wisdom, just a man who understood price, but not value. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I need to head back to San Francisco tonight. We're announcing the acquisition publicly tomorrow, and there's still work to do. I turned to Jackson. Ready when you are. You're leaving now, Amanda asked incredulously. But we haven't even processed this. I've given you all the information. Process it however you need to. I looked around at my family, some shocked, some calculating, some suddenly interested in a relationship they'd never valued before. For what it's worth, I didn't come here for vindication or to throw my success in anyone's face. I genuinely wanted to share this milestone with my family. My father's jaw tightened, and make quite the dramatic statement in the process. I smiled slightly. I learned about dramatic statements in this house, Dad. The difference is mine was backed by substance. I started toward the helicopter, then paused. Mom, I'll call you next week. We can talk properly then. As Jackson helped me aboard and began pre-flight checks, I watched my family through the window. Standing awkwardly on the lawn in their expensive clothes, their world subtly but permanently altered. My father remained frozen in place, his expression unreadable, watching as the rotors began to turn. As we lifted off, I didn't feel the triumph I might have imagined. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. Not from poverty, but from the need for validation I'd carried far too long. The California coastline appeared below as Jackson began our descent into San Francisco. The journey home gave me hours to process what had happened at my parents' estate. The vindication I'd briefly felt gave way to a complex mixture of emotions: relief, sadness, and most surprisingly, peace. My phone had been buzzing constantly during the flight. Texts from siblings suddenly interested in my life, cousins sending congratulations, my mother's tearful voice messages asking when we could talk. I responded to none of them yet, needing time to determine which relationships were worth rebuilding and which were better left in the past. Eleanor was waiting when we landed her practical sedan parked beside the private airfield. Well, she asked simply as I approached. It went exactly as expected, I replied, climbing into the passenger seat. Mockery until the helicopter arrived, then sudden respect and business propositions. She nodded knowingly. And how do you feel? Lighter, I said after a moment's reflection. Like I put down a weight I didn't know I was carrying. That evening, my closest friends gathered at my loft for what they thought was a casual dinner. Sophie, my roommate from those early struggling days. Miguel, our first engineer, who believed in the vision enough to work for equity instead of salary. Zoe, who handled our legal challenges when bigger companies tried to steal our patents. These people had become my chosen family over the years of building Ascension. I have news, I told them over dinner. As I shared the details of both the acquisition and the family confrontation, their reactions ranged from cheers to outrage on my behalf. To Jessica, Miguel toasted, raising his glass, who proved that success is the best revenge. I shook my head. That's just it. Revenge wasn't the point. For years I thought I was working to prove my father wrong. Today I realized I was actually proving myself right. The weeks that followed brought significant changes. The acquisition announcement made national business news. Suddenly I was fielding interview requests and speaking invitations. My team transitioned to Meridian's campus, where I insisted they all receive the recognition and compensation they deserved. My mother called daily until I finally answered. Our conversation was difficult but necessary. For the first time, she acknowledged her role in enabling my father's toxic standards and expressed genuine regret. I was wrong, Jessica, she said, her voice breaking. I was so focused on maintaining peace that I never stood up for you. I'm sorry it took this to make me see that. Over the following months, we rebuilt our relationship carefully. She visited San Francisco, toured the Meridian facilities, and actually listened as I explained my work. She began to establish an identity separate from my father, taking art classes and reconnecting with old friends. Thomas and Amanda made overtures as well, though their motives remained suspect. I maintained cordial but distant relationships with them, unwilling to rush into trust that hadn't been earned. My father sent a formal email congratulating me on the acquisition, but made no personal outreach. I wasn't surprised, nor particularly hurt. His approval had finally become irrelevant to my sense of self. 6 months after the family meeting incident, I established the Ascension Foundation dedicated to supporting young women in STEM fields. The foundation provided scholarships, mentorship, and seed funding for innovative projects. This, more than any helicopter design, became my proudest achievement. 1 year to the day after my helicopter landed on my parents' lawn, I hosted a different kind of family gathering. One that included my birth family members who had genuinely worked to repair our relationships alongside the chosen family who had supported me all along. We met not in my father's imposing study, but on a beach near my home with casual food and genuine conversation. My mother came along with a few cousins who had reached out sincerely in the intervening months. Thomas attended briefly, still uncomfortable in a setting where his wealth carried no special status. My father declined the invitation with a formal note citing business obligations. As the sun set over the Pacific, I realized that true wealth had nothing to do with acquisition offers or bank accounts. It lay in authentic connections, in work that brought meaning, and the courage to define success on my own terms. The journey from seeking validation to finding self-worth hadn't been easy or straight. There had been therapy sessions, tearful nights, and difficult boundaries to establish. But standing there watching waves crash as my two families, birth and chosen, mingled under string lights, I knew I'd found something my father, with all his millions, never had enough. I learned that family isn't just who you're born to, it's also who you choose and who chooses you back. Success isn't measured by who you impress, but by the impact you create and the peace you feel when your head hits the pillow at night. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving critics wrong, but living so authentically that their opinions become irrelevant. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own dreams? Share your story in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of transformation. Remember, your worth isn't determined by anyone's approval, but your own. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to build your own version of success, whatever that looks like for you.